This is Marshall Major Taylor, the first African American to win a world championship title in any sport. So how come just 33 years later he dies penniless in a Chicago hospital and is buried in an unmarked grave? Taylor was born just after Reconstruction. You know, that time where America was trying to rebuild itself after the Civil War. Sure, slavery was over, but life for the African American was far from smooth sailing. Inequality exists, and their place in society was precarious at best. Now, Taylor's dad worked as a coachman for this wealthy family in Indianapolis, the Southards. Young Marshall and the Southard son became best of buddies, and one day, they decided to gift Marshall their son's old bicycle. Little would they know what that gift would mean. As it turns out, Taylor had a knack for cycling. He wasn't just good at riding, he was also amazing at performing tricks. So let's find out how this talented young kid moved from riding an old bicycle to becoming a groundbreaking sports icon. So back in the early 1890s, a guy by the name of Tom Hay hired Marshall to do stunts and to perform bicycle shop maintenance. He even threw in a free bike. So I keep saying Marshall Major Taylor, and for some of you, you might think Major is his middle name, but it's not. It's actually a nickname. And fun fact, from what we know, the nickname Major came into existence because when Taylor performed stunts, he would dress up in military uniform. So that's how we believe the Major came in. By all accounts, Taylor was fantastic at performing stunts, drew lots of crowds, and that's good business for the bicycle shop. So Taylor would be the advertisement to get people into the bicycle shop. But Taylor had so much more potential than performing interesting stunts to entertain the crowd, and he eventually got to work with a guy by the name of Louis D. Birdie Munger. Munger was a former racer and a bicycle factory owner. The influence of Munger is important here. He's the individual that took Taylor under his wings, coached him, and eventually turned him into a championship racer. Now get this, in 1895, Taylor won a 75-mile road race, which was just the beginning. He moved to Worcester, Massachusetts and turned pro in 1896, winning race after race. But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Taylor. As a black cyclist in a predominantly white sport, he faced racial prejudice and discrimination. Some white cyclists refused to race against him, and hostile crowds even attacked him during events. But despite all the discrimination, the prejudice, the attacks, Taylor was unstoppable. And in 1899, he became the first African American to win the World Championship in cycling in Montreal. Taylor continued to compete in the United States. He went on a European tour, he went to Australia, and he gained a lot of popularity. But most of Taylor's admiration came from overseas. And sadly, his story is not dissimilar to many black athletes that would have come after him. A lot of these athletes would get more respect abroad than they would get at home. So his career was one where obviously he could have made a lot more money if the world was more equal. But here's the sad part, because I said he died in a pauper's grave. And unfortunately for Taylor, his post-racing life was challenging. He faced financial hardships, his health deteriorated, he had a rocky marriage. He tried various jobs after racing just to make ends meet. He lost all of his money in investments people stole from him. He lost his home, he lost his marriage, and eventually was living in poverty in Chicago, and the only way he knew how to survive was to try and sell copies of his self-published autobiography. And that should not go without context, because the thing that Taylor was really good at, and I think he was a visionary, because I spent time in the Indiana State Museum and I was thumbing through the clippings. He would collect everything. He was a great scrapbooker. He worked to think about his own legacy, even the bad things people were writing about him, because he understood that someday his story needed to be told, and you couldn't trust the media at the time or the establishment to do it. And so he spent time developing his own autobiography. But obviously with systemic challenges in society, he was unable to capitalize on that. And so he dies in 1932 at the age of 53. This was a guy that was an elite athlete, steep in some level of sports science of the time, fit, but after retirement, he suffered ill health. And so it's unconscionable to think about the demise. I was sad when I read the story, when I looked at some of the materials, because you have to think that here is this great individual, the first to break barriers, and he dies, he's buried in an unmarked grave. And if it wasn't for a group of other athletes coming up afterwards, going to Fred Schwinn to get some finances to give him a proper burial spot, who knows, he may be still in that unmarked grave. And those are the kind of sad realities that we must face and live with. Now let's talk about his legacy. It's strong. There's no two ways around it. Major Taylor broke down barriers, stereotypes of black athletes. He inspired a new generation to pursue their dreams. Other athletes that would come after would look to Major Taylor. His story was somewhat known, and in recent years, we've seen books about him, even children's books. And the state of Indiana, his hometown, Indianapolis in particular, they honored him with a state historical marker. There's a street named after him. The velodrome is named in his honor. And so we could go back today and look at his legacy and look at some of the markings around the country, including the United States Cycling Association. But we have to question and we have to ask ourselves, is this enough? Is it enough to just slap his name on a street? Yes, it preserves some legacy, but what is the lesson that we want to teach young people? What is that inspiring story? But more importantly, what is the lesson we want to teach the country and the world to ensure that once we see inequities that still persist, particularly in the area of sports and access to some sport, what is the story of Marshall Major Taylor teaching us to ensure that for generations to come, things will only get better? And that's what we have to wrestle with. So while Marshall Major Taylor's story may not have had the happiest of endings, he's a trailblazer, he broke barriers, and because of him, others had it just a little bit easier. I found Marshall Major Taylor's story truly inspiring. I wanted to come here and make a video just to briefly talk about his legacy, but there are many books out there that we'll leave in the description if you want to learn more. There are articles just to celebrate a guy that I thought was truly amazing. And for someone like me who really spent some time looking at sports, I just never really thought much about Marshall Major Taylor, and I was really happy to have seen a good exhibit that the Indiana State Museum put on, so shout out to that. I want to shout out to a lot of people, including Chris Bross and others who really encouraged me to go check that out, and it was fantastic. And shout out to all the people who did a teach along on it as well. I felt like the least I could have done here was to try and say something about him, and for me, not to redo what others have done, but to maybe ask that question about like his legacy. His legacy is there, like we can see it, but is it invisible, and why aren't we thinking about it more? And I want to thank you all for watching and for supporting, and let me know what else you want me to cover. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.